My life had settled. That was the word for it. It hadn't crashed or exploded or even gently drifted to a stop. It had settled like dust on furniture in a room no one enters anymore. At 38, I owned a small but respected business building custom cabinetry and doing high-end renovations. I had a mortgage on a modest house I'd fixed up myself, two good friends I saw for a game every other Thursday, and a quiet that had long ago stopped feeling like peace and started feeling like a low, persistent hum of absence. 2 years. It had been 2 years since Sarah left. Our ending wasn't a dramatic, plate-smashing affair. It was quiet, clinical, and in its own way more brutal. She had packed her bags over a weekend while I was on a job site 2 towns over. The note she left on the granite countertop I'd installed for us, was polite. It thanked me for the years, for my steadiness, for my kindness. It used words like stable and dependable as if they were congenital defects. The killing blow was a single sentence tucked near the end. I need more than safe, Leo. I need to feel alive. Safe. I was safe. Like a Volvo. Like a savings bond. Like a well-insulated attic. She had said it as if she were confessing a sin she'd been harboring. The sin of being with a man who could build her a flawless kitchen but couldn't set her world on fire. I didn't argue. What was there to say? She wasn't wrong. I was safe. I spent my days measuring tolerances to the 16th of an inch, ensuring joints were flush, foundations were level, and everything was built to last. I had applied the same principles to our life together. I had built a sturdy, reliable structure, and she had walked out the door because she wanted a tent in a hurricane. In the months that followed, I'd examined that word, safe, like a splinter under my skin. At first, it stung with insult. Then, it settled into a dull ache of resignation. I was the man you married after you were done having fun. The one who remembered to change the furnace filter and pay the bills on time. I was the prologue, the comfortable chapter before the real story began. The self-pity was a thick, cloying thing for a while, but eventually, even that wore thin. I went back to my work. We didn't judge. A level line was a level line. The clean, sharp scent of cedar and the predictable hum of a table saw were my therapy. The dust settled. So when my phone buzzed on a Tuesday afternoon with a number I didn't recognize, I almost ignored it. I was wrestling with a warped piece of reclaimed oak, and my patience was thinner than a veneer shaving. But for some reason, I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans and answered. Now, the voice was familiar, but not. It had a warm, cultured timbre, laced with an almost imperceptible strain. Not Sarah. This is he, I said, my own voice rough with sawdust. It's Claire Maxwell, Sarah's mother. A beat of silence. My mind cycled through a Rolodex of awkward family dinners and holiday gatherings from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Clara, always elegant, always composed, a woman who seemed to float through those events with a kind of detached grace. She and Sarah's father had divorced ages ago, so I'd only met her a handful of times. She was an art history professor at the university, and I always felt like a lumbering simpleton in her presence, my hands calloused and my conversation limited to things that could be sanded or stained. Clara, hello. Is everything all right? My first thought was an accident. Something had happened to Sarah. Oh yes, everyone's fine. I'm sorry to bother you at work. Sarah? Well, Sarah gave me a number some time ago. She said if anything around the house ever broke, you were the best. There was a hesitation in her voice, a slight dip in her practiced composure. It seems a bit ridiculous calling you for this, but a piece of my back fence has come down in the storm, and my dog seems to think it's a personal invitation to terrorize the neighborhood squirrels. I wouldn't know the first thing about how to fix it. I pictured her in her immaculate, tastefully decorated home, a place I'd been to once for a disastrous Christmas Eve dinner where Sarah's father and his new wife had also been invited. Clara had navigated the emotional minefield with the skill of a diplomat, but I'd seen the tension in her shoulders. Now I pictured her staring at a broken fence, a problem that couldn't be solved with a witty remark or a perfectly timed redirection. It's no bother. I heard myself say, the words automatic. I can come by and take a look. Where are you located again? She gave me the address, a street in the older, leafier part of town where the houses had character and mortgages to match. We agreed I'd stop by after I closed up the shop. As I hung up, the warped oak on my workbench seemed less important. A broken fence. It was a simple, tangible problem. A piece of the past calling with a straightforward request. I told myself it was just a job, a favor for someone who was once almost family. But a strange, unfamiliar current of something stirred in the settled dust of my life. It wasn't excitement. It was curiosity. Clara's house was a handsome two-story colonial, painted a tasteful shade of slate gray with crisp white trim. It sat on a corner lot, surrounded by a mature garden that was a riot of late spring color, even in the gloomy post-storm light. Peonies, heavy with rain, bowed their heads. Climbing roses snaked their way up a trellis by the front door. It was a house that looked loved, looked lived in. It looked like her. I pulled my work truck to the curb, feeling oversized and out of place on the quiet, manicured street. I grabbed my largest tool bag out of habit, even though a fence repair would likely only require a handful of things. I walked up the flagstone path, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and flowers. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened. Clara Maxwell stood in the doorway, and the image I had of her from those stuffy holiday dinners dissolved like sugar in hot tea. She was older than Sarah, obviously, somewhere in her early 50s, I guessed, but where Sarah's youth had a frantic, searching quality, Clara's age had honed her into something definite and sharp. Her hair was a stylish salt and pepper cut that framed a face with fine lines around the eyes and mouth, laugh lines, thinking lines. They weren't flaws, they were evidence. She wore simple black trousers and a soft gray sweater, no jewelry except for a pair of small silver earrings. She was beautiful, but it wasn't the kind of beauty that demanded attention. It was the kind that earned it. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met mine. There was no pity in them, no awkwardness, just a direct, appraising look. "Now, thank you for coming on such short notice." Her voice was even warmer in person. "Not a problem," I said, my own voice feeling like gravel. I hefted my tool bag. "You said it was the back fence." "Yes." "This way." She gestured for me to follow her, not through the house, but along a stone path that led around the side. As I followed, I took in the details. The perfectly maintained garden beds, the copper rain chains instead of downspouts, the small bench tucked into a nook under a weeping cherry tree. Everything was intentional. Everything had its place. "I apologize for the mess," she said over her shoulder. The wind really did a number on things. The yard was anything but a mess. A few scattered leaves, a couple of overturned pots she'd likely already set right. Then I saw it. A single 8-foot section of the tall wooden privacy fence that enclosed the backyard was lying flat on the lawn, as if it had simply given up. A golden retriever with a face full of mischief sat beside the down panel, thumping its tail against the grass, a piece of fence picket proudly displayed between its paws. Clara sighed, a sound of fond exasperation. "That's Walter. He seems to believe you brought him a new chew toy." I couldn't help but smile. "Walter, he looks pleased with himself. Deliriously so." I'd scold him, but I'm fairly certain he's the one who alerted me to the problem in the first place, by way of a victory lap through Mrs. Henderson's petunias. I set my bag down and walked over to the fence. The posts on either side were still solid, set in concrete. The panel itself was intact. It looked like the nails holding the horizontal rails to the post had just rusted through and given way. It was a 10-minute fix, maybe 15 if I was being meticulous. An easy job, almost too easy. "Look straight forward," I said, turning back to her. She was watching me, her head tilted slightly. That direct gaze was unnerving. It was the look of someone who was actually listening, actually seeing. "Is it?" she asked, a faint, unreadable smile playing on her lips. "That's a relief." For a moment, I considered tackling it myself. "I even have a toolbox." She gestured toward the back porch. Sitting next to the door was a brand-new, cherry-red toolbox. It was pristine, the kind of thing you buy at a home improvement store with the best of intentions. The plastic molding was unscratched, the metal latches gleamed. It looked like it had never been opened. I see that, I said, the corner of my own mouth twitching. Looks like a serious piece of equipment. I thought so, she said, her eyes twinkling. I bought last year. I was going to become a woman of action, a mistress of my own domestic destiny. So far, its primary function has been as a very sturdy, inexpensive doorstop. The self-deprecating humor was unexpected. It disarmed me. I found myself chuckling, a real laugh that surprised me with its own sound. Well, the best tools are the ones you never have to use. A lovely sentiment, but one that doesn't seem to be helping with my fence, she countered smoothly. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? Coffee would be great, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. She turned and walked toward the house, Walter trotting happily at her heels. I watched her go, the easy grace in her walk, the straight line of her back. Then I turned my attention to the fence. I pulled a pry bar, a hammer, and a box of galvanized deck screws from my bag. The old nails came out easily. The wood was weathered, but still solid. As I worked, leveraging the panel back into place, the quiet of the yard was broken only by the scrape of wood and the distant sound of traffic. This was familiar territory. A problem, a solution, action, result. But it felt different. I wasn't just a contractor on a job site. I was in her space, this carefully curated world she had built for herself. The pristine toolbox sat on the porch like a silent, witty commentary. It wasn't a cry for help. It felt more like a statement of priorities. She knew what she was good at, and it wasn't fixing fences. She returned a few minutes later, carrying a tray, with 2 ceramic mugs and a small plate of cookies. She set it down on the small patio table. I hope you don't mind, she said. I baked these yesterday. They're oatmeal raisin, my one domestic skill that doesn't come in a red metal box. I had the fence panel propped in place and was getting ready to drive the first screw. I straightened up, wiping a smudge of dirt from my brow. Oatmeal raisin is severely underrated. I agree completely, she said, her expression serious, as if we were discussing philosophy. It's the sensible, reliable cookie. The chocolate chip gets all the glory, but the oatmeal raisin is the one that's secretly better for you. I paused, a screw in my hand. Safe, stable, dependable. The word from Sarah's note echoed in my head, but hearing Clara reframe them in the context of a cookie, it didn't sting. It was funny. I've never thought of it that way, I admitted. You should. Perspective is everything. She handed me a mug. The coffee was dark and smelled incredible. Please take a break. The squirrels have been vanquished for the moment. I took a sip. It was strong and hot, perfect. We stood there in the quiet of her garden, drinking coffee while her dog chewed on a stick nearby. It was comfortable, dangerously comfortable. So, she began, her gaze drifting to the half-repaired fence, then back to me. Sarah is in Belize, I think. Or was it Bali? She's finding herself. Again, there was no judgment in her tone, just a dry statement of fact. It was the first time anyone had mentioned Sarah to me without a thick coating of pity or awkwardness. Belize sounds nice, I said, taking another sip of coffee. I'm sure it is. She sent a postcard. It had a picture of a monkey on it. She said she was learning to weave baskets from palm fronds. She seems happy. That's good. And I found, to my surprise, that I meant it. The old wound didn't twinge. It was just a scar, faded and pale. Clara looked at me over the rim of her mug, her blue eyes sharp and intelligent. She always said you were the quiet one. I braced myself for the follow-up. The usual platitudes. But you're so nice. She didn't know what she had. Instead, she said, she never mentioned you were witty. The observation landed with the quiet precision of a scalpel. It wasn't a compliment, not really. It was an observation, a fact she had discovered that contradicted her prior data. And in that moment, I felt a profound and unfamiliar sensation. I felt seen, not as Sarah's dependable ex-boyfriend, not as a handyman, but as me, Lau, the quiet, witty man who appreciated an underrated cookie. I save it for special occasions, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Her lips curved into a genuine, brilliant smile. It lit up her whole face, erasing the last of the professorial reserve. Well, I'm honored the fence constitutes a special occasion. I finished the coffee and the cookie, the silence between us no longer just comfortable, but charged with a new energy. I went back to the fence, my movements efficient and sure. I drove the screws in, securing the panel until it was more solid than it had been when it was new. The whole process took less than 20 minutes from start to finish. I packed up my tools, my hands moving with a familiar rhythm. When I turned around, she was still there, leaning against the patio table, watching me. "All done," I said. "Should be good for another 20 years. "Thank you, Leo. Truly. What do I owe you?" "Nothing," I said immediately. It was a 10-minute fix. Call it a professional courtesy for being the mother of the woman who broke my heart in the politest way possible. I didn't say that part. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "Your time is valuable. Let me write you a check." Clara, I met her gaze, holding it. The coffee and the cookie were payment enough. Honestly, she studied my face for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression she was reading every line, every bit of subtext. Finally, she gave a small nod. "All right, but only if you promise to let me pay you for the next thing that breaks." The way she said it, the next thing, hung in the air between us. It wasn't a question of if, but when. "We'll see," I said, a smile playing on my lips. As I walked back to my truck, I could feel her eyes on my back. I put the tool bag in the passenger seat and got in, the scent of her garden clinging to my clothes. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still standing on the path, a solitary, graceful figure in her perfect garden. Next to her back door, the shiny red toolbox stood sentinel, its purpose still a mystery. It wasn't a doorstop. I was starting to think it was bait, and I was starting to think I was okay with that. A week went by. The hum of my settled life returned, but it had changed its frequency. It was less about absence and more about anticipation. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, my stomach did a little flip. I told myself it was ridiculous. I was a grown man, a business owner, not a teenager waiting for a call. I sanded a set of cherry cabinets with more vigor than necessary, trying to physically work the thought of her out of my system. It didn't work. The memory of her smile, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the unexpected comfort of that shared coffee, it had all taken up residence in my head. On Friday afternoon, the call came. "Lau, it's Clara." I leaned against my workbench, a fine layer of sawdust covering everything. "Let me guess," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "A rogue gang of squirrels has dismantled your gazebo." I heard her laugh on the other end, a low musical sound. "Not quite, although Walter is doing his best to loosen the foundation. No, this is an indoor problem. A floorboard in my study has developed the most atrocious squeak. It sounds like a dying mouse every time I walk across it. It's driving me mad." "A squeaky floorboard," I repeated slowly. "A serious affliction. Terminal, I'm afraid. For my sanity, at least. I was wondering if your professional services extend to minor exorcisms of noisy carpentry." "It's a specialty," I said. "I can be there in an hour." "Wonderful. I'll put the coffee on." She hung up, and I stood there for a moment, smiling at my phone. It was absurd. A squeaky floorboard. A woman with her resources could have called a dozen different handymen from a quick online search. But she had called me. The pretense was so thin it was transparent, and that was the most intriguing part. She wasn't trying to fool me. It felt like a game, and she was inviting me to play along. This time, when I pulled up to her house, I left the big tool bag in the truck. I grabbed a smaller canvas pouch with a few specific tools, a drill, some shims, a bottle of wood glue, a finish nailer. It felt more appropriate, less like a professional call, and more like something else. She opened the door before I knocked, just like last time. She was wearing a simple, elegant blue dress that made her eyes look even brighter. "The patient is this way," she said, her tone grave, but her eyes were dancing. She led me through the house. The inside was just as I'd imagined. Bookshelves filled every available wall. Art hung in tasteful arrangements, and everything was clean and ordered without feeling sterile. It was a home, not a showroom. We entered a study at the back of the house, a cozy room lined with darkwood shelves and a large window overlooking the garden. A beautiful antique desk sat in the center of the room. "This is the scene of the crime," she announced, pointing to a spot on the hardwood floor. "Walk there, if you dare." I obliged, stepping on the indicated board. It let out a loud, groaning squeak that echoed in the quiet room. It was, I had to admit, a truly obnoxious squeak. "I see what you mean," I said, rocking my weight back and forth to replicate the sound. "That would drive me crazy too, right? It's a new development. I think the house is beginning to protest my presence. Or just want a little attention." I knelt, running my hand over the plank. The finish was perfect, the seams tight. The problem was likely a loose subfloor joist underneath. "I'll need to get into the crawl space to fix it properly." "Of course," she said, gesturing to a door in the hallway. "Be my guest. I warn you, it's probably home to spiders the size of dinner plates." "I've never been in there." "Spiders and I have a professional understanding," I said. "We ignore each other." The crawl space was tight and musty, but clean and dry. I found the offending joist easily enough. A small gap had formed between it and the subfloor. It was a simple fix. I applied a bead of construction adhesive and tapped a few shims into the gap until it was snug. The whole operation took less time than my coffee break last week. When I emerged, dusty and slightly cobweb-adorned, Clara was waiting in the study with 2 cups of coffee on a tray, just like before. But as I was brushing the dust off my jeans, the doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive chime. Clara's expression tightened for a fraction of a second. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little cooler. I could hear voices from the front hall. A man's voice, loud and confident, booming through the quiet house. "Clara, darling, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd surprise you." "Julian," Clara's voice was polite but strained. "What a surprise." A moment later, she walked back into the study, followed by a man who looked like he'd just stepped out of a catalog for expensive watches. He was tall, silver-haired, and handsome in a way that looked like it required a lot of maintenance. He wore a crisp pink polo shirt, blindingly white trousers, and a smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. He took in the scene, me dusty and on my knees, Clara holding a tray, and his smile tightened into a smirk. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you having some work done?" I didn't mean to interrupt. He looked directly at me, dismissing me as part of the furniture. "Leo is fixing a floorboard for me," Clara said, her voice carefully neutral. "Leo, this is Julian Croft." "Julian, Leo." I rose to my feet. Julian's eyes flicked over my work clothes, my dusty hands, and he gave a curt, dismissive nod. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "A floorboard," Julian repeated, as if the concept were quaintly amusing. "Darling, you should have just called my facilities guy. He handles all the maintenance at the club. He would have had someone out here in a jiffy." He turned his attention back to Clara, placing a proprietary hand on her arm. "You shouldn't be bothering yourself with these little domestic dramas." I could feel the heat rising in my neck. The casual arrogance, the way he touched her, the way he'd reduced me to the help without a second thought. It was a masterclass in smug entitlement. I looked at Clara. Her jaw was tight, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. She was handling it, but she was uncomfortable. I decided to play along. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet and even. "It's been a real drama. We lost 3 good men trying to secure this plank." The squeak was formidable. Julian stared at me, his brow furrowed, unsure if I was serious. Clara's eyes flicked to mine, and I saw a spark of amusement, a tiny crack in her tense facade. He recovered quickly, letting out a short, barking laugh. "Very funny. A regular comedian. So, how much is this little adventure going to set you back, Clara?" "Let me take care of it." He pulled a thick wallet from his pocket, the gesture ostentatious and insulting. This was the test, the social gauntlet thrown down. I could either shrink back into the role he'd assigned me, or I could stand my ground. I thought about Sarah, about being safe and quiet. I thought about Clara's comment. "She never mentioned you were witty." I looked not at Julian, but at Clara. Clara and I have a very complex barter system worked out, I said, my tone light and conversational. The current rate for 1 de-squeakification is 2 cups of excellent coffee and 1 oatmeal raisin cookie. I'm afraid your cash is no good here. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian's hand, holding his wallet, froze mid-air. His face, a mask of affable condescension just moments before, was slowly turning a shade that clashed violently with his pink shirt. He looked from me to Clara, a flicker of genuine confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand the language we were speaking. Clara broke the silence. She let out a small, breathy laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. She gently removed her arm from his grasp and stepped away, creating a small but significant space between them. "Leo is right, Julian," she said, her voice smooth as silk now, all tension gone. "He works for cookies. It's a very exclusive arrangement." She picked up one of the coffee cups and handed it to me. "Your payment, sir." I took the cup, my fingers brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt through me. I held her gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. In that moment, Julian ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, co-conspirators in a quiet, witty rebellion against his boorishness. Julian, flustered and outmaneuvered, snapped his wallet shut. "Right? Well, how?" Charming. He clearly wanted to say more, to re-establish his dominance. But he had no footing. We had taken the ground out from under him with a joke he wasn't on. "I was just on my way to the club," he said stiffly. "Thought you might want to join me for dinner." "That's kind of you, Julian, but I have plans this evening," Clara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Right," he said again, his eyes darting between us one last time, a flicker of suspicion finally dawning. "Well, I'll call you." He turned and walked out of the study without another word, his expensive loafers making no sound at all on the now silent floor. We heard the front door close with a firm click. The quiet he left behind was thick and alive. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest. Clara leaned back against her desk, a slow smile spreading across her face. She looked at me, her head tilted in that appraising way she had. "A very complex barter system," she repeated softly, her eyes shining. "The exchange rates can be volatile," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. She was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. The air was charged, filled with everything that hadn't been said. The game had just become a little more real. Then she said the words that hit me with the force of a physical blow, quiet and devastatingly perceptive. "Sarah always said you avoided conflict," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said you were passive." She mistook stillness for weakness. She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. She was a fool. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the insult to Sarah that struck me. It was the validation, the complete and total reversal of a narrative that had defined me for years. She mistook stillness for weakness. Clara hadn't just seen my wit. She had seen my strength. Not the strength it took to lift a heavy beam or hammer a nail, but the quiet, internal strength of choosing your battles, of knowing that the sharpest weapon isn't always the loudest one. All I could do was stand there, coffee cup in hand, feeling the settled dust of my entire life being swept away by the force of that one simple, profound observation. I had been seen, and I was beginning to suspect that I had been seen by the only person who mattered. The squeaky floorboard was followed by a sticking window in the guest room, then a dripping faucet in the downstairs bathroom, and finally, a request to look at a wobbly newel post at the bottom of her staircase. Each call was a new verse in the song we were composing, a melody of plausible deniability and shared amusement. Each visit followed the same ritual. The pretense of the job, the coffee, the conversation that skimmed across the surface of things, but was anchored by a growing weight of unspoken understanding. Julian did not make another appearance, but his presence lingered like a bad cologne. Clara mentioned him once, briefly. "Julian has decided I am not a suitable investment," she'd said with a wry twist of her lips, and that was that. His dismissal felt like a victory, a small clearing we had carved out for ourselves. The wobbly newel post was the most intimate repair yet. It required me to be inside the main artery of her home, kneeling on the first few steps of her staircase. It was a beautiful piece of carved oak, original to the house, and it had come loose from the floor. As I worked, drilling a pilot hole for a lag bolt that would anchor it from below, she sat on the stairs a few steps above me, watching. "You're very good at this," she said, her voice soft in the quiet hall. "You have patient hands." I looked up at her. She was wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her hair slightly tousled. She looked younger, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. The afternoon sun streamed through a high window on the landing, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between us. "I like fixing things," I said. "It's satisfying. You start with something broken, and you end with something whole." "A worthy pursuit," she murmured, her gaze thoughtful. She hugged her knees to her chest. "I teach art history. I spend my days talking about things that are already finished, already perfect, masterpieces that have been hanging in museums for centuries. There's a certain finality to it. What you do is different. It's about the process, the restoration." I thought about that. The restoration. It was exactly the right word. I wasn't just fixing things. I was bringing them back to their intended state. I finished drilling and began to ratchet the lag bolt into place, the quiet clicks echoing in the hall. "Do you ever miss teaching?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. She'd mentioned retiring early a few visits ago. "I miss the students who were genuinely curious," she said after a pause. "I don't miss the bureaucracy or the faculty meetings that could have been an email. I don't miss feeling like a relic myself, discussing Monet with students who were more interested in their phones." She sighed softly. "I think I was ready for a different kind of process, a restoration of my own." Our eyes met, and the air grew thick again. This was it. This was the moment where the subtext was threatening to become text. The game was reaching its final move. I could feel the shift, the subtle change in gravity between us. We were no longer just a homeowner and a handyman, or an ex's mother and her former sort of son-in-law. We were two people sitting on a staircase in a sun-drenched hall, talking about restoration. And then, of course, the doorbell rang. The sound was so jarring, so completely out of place in our quiet bubble, that we both flinched. Clara's face clouded over with an expression of pure annoyance. For a wild second, I thought it was Julian again, come back for another round of humiliation. "I'm not expecting anyone," she said, her voice tight. She rose and went to the door. I stayed on the stairs, my ratchet wrench still in my hand, feeling like an intruder. I heard the door open, and then a voice that was both familiar and utterly alien in this context. "Mom?" I tried calling, but you didn't answer. "Sarah." My blood went cold. I froze on the stairs, every muscle in my body tensing. "Sarah, here, now." Of all the possible interruptions, this was the one I could never have anticipated. Belize or Bali, or wherever she had been, was suddenly here on this doorstep. "Sarah, my God, what are you doing here? I thought you were—" Clara's voice was a mixture of shock and confusion. "The retreat ended early. I flew into the city last night and decided to surprise you." There was a pause. "Are you okay? You look flustered. And whose truck is that out front?" "The big work truck." "My truck." She recognized my truck. The bubble didn't just burst, it vaporized. Reality, in the form of my very recent ex-girlfriend, came crashing in. There was another beat of silence from the doorway. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah, tanned and glowing with the self-satisfaction of the recently enlightened, looking past her mother and seeing me, kneeling on the stairs with a wrench in my hand. "Lau." Her voice was sharp with disbelief. "What on earth are you doing here?" Slowly, I got to my feet. I turned to face the doorway, my heart pounding a heavy, clumsy rhythm against my ribs. Sarah stood there, looking exactly as I'd imagined, a woven bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes wide with astonishment. Her gaze flicked from me to her mother and then back to me. A dozen emotions played across her face: confusion, suspicion, and a flicker of something that looked unervingly like possessiveness. Clara stepped back into the hall, looking between the two of us, her face a pale, unreadable mask. The easy warmth of moments ago was gone, replaced by a sudden, formal chill. "Leo was just fixing the newel post for me," Clara said, her voice strained. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "The newel post," she repeated flatly. She looked around the hall, at the pristine walls, the gleaming floors. "Right. You've been here before, haven't you? That's your truck. I knew it. What else has been broken?" The air quotes were practically audible, dripping with sarcasm. This was a confrontation I had never wanted. It felt sordid and cheap. I looked at Clara, at the way she held herself so still, her composure a fragile shield. The man who avoided conflict would have mumbled an excuse and made for the nearest exit. He would have retreated, made himself small. But that man was a fool who mistook stillness for weakness. "Your mother's fence blew down a few weeks ago," I said, my voice calm and steady, cutting through the tension. Then a floorboard started squeaking. Then a faucet was dripping. "I fix things, Sarah. It's what I do." My calmness seemed to infuriate her more than an argument would have. "You fix things," she scoffed. "So you've become my mother's personal handyman? How cozy." She turned on Clara, her voice rising. "Mom, what is this? Did you really have to call him? There are a million other people you could have called." "Leo is good at what he does," Clara said, her voice dangerously quiet. "And he was kind enough to help." "Kind enough? Or you've been what?" "Finding excuses to see him." Sarah's laugh was harsh. "Unbelievable. I leave for a few months, and you start whatever this is with my safe, boring ex-boyfriend. What, did you get lonely? Needed a project?" The words were designed to wound, to belittle both of us in a single, vicious blow. Safe. Boring. She threw the words like stones. I saw Clara flinch. A flicker of deep hurt crossed her face before she masked it. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry break, but a quiet, decisive shift. This wasn't about me and Sarah anymore. This was about the woman standing in her own home, being attacked by her own daughter for the crime of showing me a little kindness. This was about the woman who had seen me. I took a step forward, placing myself subtly between them. I looked directly at Sarah, my gaze level. "That's enough," I said. The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of absolute finality. Sarah stopped, taken aback. I had never used that tone with her. Never. "Your mother reached out to me for help with a fence." I continued, my voice low and even. "I came and fixed it, and I was happy to do it. And I was happy to come back when she called again. Not because she's your mother, Sarah, but because she's a kind, intelligent, and interesting person who makes excellent coffee and happens to appreciate an underrated cookie." The absurdity of the last phrase hung in the air. It was our secret language, and I was deploying it now as a shield and a statement. "I've enjoyed her company," I went on, the truth of it settling in my bones. "I've enjoyed our conversations. And if her fence, or her floor, or her faucet hadn't broken, I would have found my own reason to call her. Because I want to see her again. This has nothing to do with you." It was a declaration, a public defense, a line drawn in the sand of her beautiful hardwood floor. I had moved from passive observer to active participant. Sarah stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She looked from me to her mother, who was watching me with an expression of stunned wonder. Sarah's face cycled through disbelief, then anger, and finally, a deep, wounded confusion. She didn't understand. She was looking at the same man she had left, but he was speaking a language she had never heard. She had looked at a Volvo and seen a Volvo. She had no idea it had a different engine under the hood. "You can't be serious," she whispered, shaking her head. "My mother," Clara finally spoke, her voice regaining its strength. "Sarah, this is my home, and Leo is my guest. You are welcome here, but you will not speak to either of us that way." Her tone was firm, the tone of a mother, yes, but also the tone of a woman drawing a boundary. She was not a project. She was not lonely. She was a person, and she was claiming her space. The three of us stood in the hallway, trapped in a tableau of shock and recrimination. The sunbeam from the landing window had shifted, plunging the hall into shadow. The warmth was gone. The easy, playful game of broken things was over. Now, it was just the broken pieces of what came after lying at our feet, and we all had to decide what to do with them. Sarah didn't have a response. My declaration, followed by Clara's firm boundary, had left her without a script. She looked at me, then at her mother, her expression a turbulent mix of anger and hurt. She had expected to walk in and find me as she had left me. Quiet, accommodating, safe. She had expected her mother to be just that. Her mother, an ancillary character in the story of Sarah's life. The scene she had walked into made no sense in her worldview. I can't, she finally stammered, shaking her head as if to clear it. She took a step back toward the open door. I need some air. She turned and fled, not even closing the door behind her, her footsteps echoing on the flagstone path before disappearing. The silence she left behind was heavy and profound. It was filled with the ghosts of everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't. I stood there, my hands still gripping the cold metal of the ratchet wrench, my knuckles white. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm. I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of Clara's quiet, orderly life. Slowly, I turned to look at her. She was standing by the staircase, one hand resting on the newly tightened newel post, as if for support. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and shadowed. I couldn't read her expression. Was it shock? Anger? Regret? Clara, I started, my voice hoarse. I am so sorry. She blinked, as if coming out of trance. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her expression softened into something I couldn't quite decipher. It was complex, a mixture of gratitude and something much more vulnerable. Don't be, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You have nothing to be sorry for. I had no right, I said, shaking my head. This is your home, your daughter. I overstepped. No, she said, her voice gaining a bit of its former strength. She took a step away from the staircase, toward me. You didn't. You said what was true. She paused, her gaze searching mine. Did you mean it? The question hung in the air, simple and direct. It cut through all the drama, all the history. Did you mean it? Every word, I said, and the certainty of it resonated through my entire body. It was the truest thing I'd said in years. A long, trembling breath escaped her lips. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, the vulnerability was still there, but it was edged with a new resolve. The aftermath of the explosion was settling, and we were the only two left standing in the wreckage. The stakes, which had been a playful undercurrent, were now stark and real. Our little game had been exposed, and we were left with the consequences. And the consequences felt enormous. I think, she began, then stopped. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of uncertainty that was so unlike her usual composure. I think you should probably go, Leo. The words were a punch to the gut. Of course. It was over. The fantasy was done. I had brought chaos to her door, and now she was, quite rightly, asking me to leave. I had mistaken her gratitude for something more. Right, I said, my voice flat. I bent down to gather my tools, my movements stiff and clumsy. Of course. I'll just get my things. I couldn't look at her. The shame and disappointment were a bitter taste in my mouth. I was an idiot. A hopeful, sentimental idiot. Leo, her voice was soft but firm, stopping me in my tracks. I looked up. She had crossed the space between us and was standing only a few feet away. That's not what I mean. She took another step closer. I need to talk to Sarah. I need to deal with that. She gestured vaguely toward the open door. And you and I, she trailed off, searching for the right words. This can't happen in hallways, squeezed between broken things and unexpected arrivals. This deserves more than that. My heart, which had plummeted to the floor, started a slow, hopeful ascent. I'm out of broken things, Leo, she said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. It was a direct echo of my own thought from earlier. There are no more excuses. So if there's going to be a next time, it has to be on purpose. She held my gaze, her own clear and unwavering now. It was a challenge, an invitation. She was handing the choice to me, putting the ball squarely in my court. The game was over, and now it was time to be real. Dinner, I said, the word coming out faster than I'd intended. On purpose. No tools involved. A genuine smile finally broke through her strained expression. It was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. I would like that very much. Friday? I asked, my voice still a little shaky. Friday, she confirmed with a nod. I finished packing my small tool pouch, my hands moving with renewed purpose. When I stood up, she was still there, watching me. The space between us felt different now. The tension was still there, but it had transformed from something fraught and uncertain into a quiet, humming anticipation. I'll call you, I said as I reached the door. I'll answer, she replied. I walked out into the cool afternoon air, leaving the door open as Sarah had. I didn't look back. As I got into my truck, I saw Sarah sitting on a bench across the street, her head in her hands. She looked up as my engine started, her face tear-streaked and confused. I met her gaze for a brief moment, a flicker of the old life connecting with the new one. There was no anger in me, no triumph, just a quiet, sad finality. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving them both to navigate the aftershocks. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a chaotic replay of the last hour, but one thing stood out with brilliant clarity. If there's going to be a next time, it has to be on purpose. The next 2 days were a form of exquisite torture. I tried to work, but my focus was shot. I'd find myself staring at a piece of wood, the grains swirling like the complicated emotions in my chest. I replayed the scene in the hallway 100 times. My own words echoing in my head. This has nothing to do with you. It was the moment I had finally, fully cut the cord to my past with Sarah, not out of anger, but out of a fierce, protective loyalty to Clara. I waited until Wednesday evening to call her. A day for the dust to settle. A day for her to talk to Sarah. I dialed her number with a hand that was not quite steady. Hello. Her voice was hesitant. Clara, it's Leo. Leo, a wave of relief washed through her voice, so palpable I could feel it through the phone. I was hoping you'd call. I said I would. I said softly. Is this still a good idea? Friday. There was a pause. It's the best idea I've heard all week, she said, her voice warm and sure. Is 8 o'clock okay? My house. I'll cook. I think we've earned a quiet evening in. Your house is perfect, I agreed. And for the record, I volunteered to do the dishes. I heard her soft laugh. It's a date. A date. The words settled in my chest, warm and solid. Not a repair call. Not a favor. A date. On purpose. When Friday arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I changed my shirt 3 times. A man who spent his days covered in sawdust, was suddenly agonizing over the difference between a dark blue button-down and a slightly less dark blue button-down. It was ridiculous. I felt like a teenager. I finally settled on the first shirt, a clean pair of dark jeans, and my best boots. I bought a bottle of wine, a good Cabernet that the woman at the wine shop assured me was elegant and complex. It felt appropriate. I pulled up to her house at exactly 8 o'clock. The lights were on, casting a warm glow from the windows. The house looked like a sanctuary. As I walked up the path, wine bottle in hand, I felt a profound sense of stepping over a threshold, not just into her home, but into a new chapter of my life. She opened the door, and my breath caught. She was wearing a simple, sleeveless black dress that fell to her knees. Her hair was down, and she wore a touch of makeup that made her eyes stand out. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked ready. The professorial armor, the maternal guard, it was all gone. It was just her. Hi, she said, her smile a little shy. Hi, I replied, feeling just as shy. I held up the wine. Iko me bering gifts. I'm told it's complex. Her smile widened. My favorite kind. She took the bottle and led me inside. The house smelled incredible, a rich aroma of garlic and herbs. In the dining room, the table was set for 2, with candles and cloth napkins. My heart did a little flip. This was real. I hope you're hungry, she said, leading me toward the kitchen. I made lasagna. It's the other thing I can cook besides cookies. I figure I should play to my strengths. I'm sure it's amazing, I said, leaning against the doorframe of her kitchen as she opened the wine. The kitchen was the heart of the house, a big, open space with a large island in the center. It was a cook's kitchen, well used and well loved. She poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed, and that familiar spark jumped between us. This time, neither of us pulled away. To purposeful evenings, she said, raising her glass. I'll drink to that, I said, clinking my glass against hers. We ate in the dining room, the candlelight flickering between us. The lasagna was, in fact, amazing, but the food was secondary. The main course was the conversation. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about our work, about books we'd read, about funny things Walter the dog had done that week. It was easy, effortless. Then, as we were finishing our wine, the conversation inevitably turned to the one topic we had been avoiding. I spoke to Sarah, she said quietly, her gaze on the candle flame. I waited, my body tensing slightly. It was difficult, she admitted. She's hurt, confused. She feels betrayed. By both of us, Clara looked up, meeting my eyes. She thinks I was lonely and you were convenient. And what did you tell her? I asked softly. I told her the truth, she said. I told her I wasn't lonely. I was content. I told her that my life was full. And then you showed up to fix a fence and you made me laugh. And you listened. And you saw me in a way that no one has in a very long time. I told her it had nothing to do with convenience and everything to do with connection. She took a sip of wine, her hand trembling slightly. And I told her that you were not the man she thought she'd left behind. I told her she had mistaken your quiet nature for a lack of depth, and that was her loss, not your failing. I was speechless. She had defended me. She had articulated everything I had ever felt about my relationship with Sarah, everything I had never been able to put into words myself. She had fought for me, for us, to her own daughter. As for our connection, she continued, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. I told her that was something I was choosing to explore, for myself, and that I expected her, as my daughter, to respect my choice, even if she didn't understand it. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was cool, her fingers trembling slightly in mine. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining in the candlelight. There's nothing to thank me for. I just told the truth. We sat in silence for a long moment, our hands clasped on the table between us. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with the gravity of the choice she had made. Finally, she looked at me, her expression serious and direct. That look that saw right through me. Leo, she said, her voice low, I'm out of broken things. I am out of excuses. So I have to ask, what are we doing? There it was. The question. The one that demanded an answer without pretense, without jokes about cookies or barter systems. It required the truth, plain and simple. I took a deep breath. I thought about the last 2 years, about the settled dust and the quiet hum of absence. I thought about how that quiet had been filled, first with curiosity, then with laughter, then with a fierce, protective feeling I hadn't felt in a decade. What are we doing? I repeated softly. I let go of her hand and stood up, walking around the table to where she sat. I knelt down beside her chair, so we were at eye level. I took her hand again, holding it in both of mine. What I am doing, I said, my voice steady, is falling for a brilliant, witty, and perceptive woman who has a terrible taste in toolboxes but an incredible taste in coffee. I'm falling for the way you see things other people miss. I'm falling for the way your eyes light up when you laugh. I'm falling for the woman who made me feel more seen in a few short weeks than I have in my entire life. I looked at her, at the way the candlelight caught the silver in her hair, at the soft vulnerability in her beautiful eyes. I'm not looking for a project, Clara. I'm not looking for convenience. I'm looking at you, and I think I've been looking for you for a very long time. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. A slow, brilliant, breathtaking smile. She reached out with her free hand and cupped my face, her thumb gently stroking my cheek. Leo, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, exploratory kiss. It was a kiss of certainty of arrival. It was a kiss that tasted of complex wine and unspoken truths finally given voice. It was gentle and deep, and it felt like coming home. It felt like every broken piece of me was finally being put back together, not fixed but made whole. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads against each other, breathing the same air. "So," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing." I confirmed, my voice a low rumble in my chest. I felt a laugh bubble up inside me, a laugh of pure, unadulterated joy. The dust had not just been stirred, it had been banished. The hum of absence had been replaced by a symphony, and it was just beginning. That night marked the end of the beginning. The shift from on purpose to, of course, our first real date wasn't dinner at her house, but the Saturday that followed. I took her to a small, independent gallery downtown run by a friend of mine. It was a place I loved, full of sculptures made from reclaimed wood and metal. It was a piece of my world, and I wanted to share it with her. Watching her move through the space was a revelation. She didn't just look at the art, she saw it. She'd run a hand over the rough grain of a salvaged beam, her expression thoughtful. She'd ask me questions about joinery and finishing techniques, her art historian's mind dissecting the process with genuine curiosity. She spoke to my friend, the artist, not with condescension, but with the respect of one creator for another. In that quiet gallery, surrounded by the things I understood, I watched her and felt a sense of pride that was so fierce it almost scared me. People looked at us. I was aware of the glances, the subtle calculus of our age difference. I was a man in his late 30s with calloused hands. She was an elegant woman in her 50s. But when she turned to me, her face lit up with an idea about a particular piece and slid her hand into mine. The rest of the world and its opinions simply ceased to matter. Her hand fit in mine as if it were made to be there. Later, we sat in a small cafe, and we talked about the past. It wasn't a morbid rehashing of old wounds, but a quiet sharing of scars. I told her more about Sarah, about the slow, creeping realization that I was a foundation she intended to build on and then leave behind. I think I spent 10 years trying to be the man I thought she wanted. I admitted, stirring my coffee. Solid. Unflappable. I sanded down all my own rough edges. By the end, I think I'd sanded myself down to almost nothing. "She didn't deserve you," Clara said simply without malice. Not because she's a bad person, but because she was looking for a reflection, not a partner. She wanted someone to validate her own restlessness. She paused, her gaze distant. My ex-husband was a bit like that. Richard, Sarah's father. He was a corporate lawyer, very successful, very charming. He loved having a professor for a wife. It looked good. He loved my mind, as long as it was curating his dinner parties and decorating his houses. The moment I had an opinion that contradicted his, or a desire that didn't fit into his 5-year plan, my intelligence became problematic. We found a startling, bittersweet common ground in that cafe. We were two people who had been loved for our utility, for the roles we played, the steady provider, the elegant intellectual, rather than for the messy, complicated, whole people we actually were. The discovery didn't make us bitter. It made us grateful. It made the connection we were building feel less like a happy accident and more like a hard-earned destination. The weeks that followed were a quiet, steady rhythm of integration. It happened in small, mundane ways that were more profound than any grand gesture. One morning, after staying the night at her house, I left my favorite coffee mug, a heavy ceramic one I'd had for years, on her counter. I didn't realize it until I was at my workshop. I called her about to say I'd swing by to get it, but she cut me off. "Don't you dare," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It's here. I'll wash it. It can live here now." A coffee mug. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. It was an anchor, a claim. A week later, I came over on a Saturday to find her in the garden, wrestling with a large bag of soil. Her pristine red toolbox was sitting nearby, still mocking her with its cleanliness. "What's all this?" I asked, leaning down to kiss her. "I've decided to plant a vegetable garden," she announced, wiping a smudge of dirt from her nose. "A new project. But this bag weighs more than Walter." I picked up the bag easily and carried it to the prepared bed. I spent the rest of the afternoon with her in the sun, not as a hired hand, but as a partner. We dug in the rich, dark earth together, planting rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. Our hands were equally dirty, our laughter mixed with the buzzing of bees. At one point, she playfully sprayed me with a hose, and I chased her around the yard like a teenager, finally catching her and spinning her around until we were both dizzy and breathless. We ended up collapsed on the grass, her head on my chest, Walter licking both our faces indiscriminately. Lying there, the scent of damp earth and her perfume filling my senses, I felt a kind of deep, uncomplicated happiness I hadn't known was possible. Our lives began to weave together, the threads of my world and hers creating a new pattern. My friends, Mark and David, were initially suspicious. Sarah's mom, Mark, had asked his eyebrows halfway to his hairline during our bi-weekly game night. Just meet her was all I said. So I invited them over for a barbecue at Clara's. I grilled, and Clara charmed them without even trying. She talked sports with Mark and debated politics with David. She treated them not as my goofy friends, but as interesting people. By the end of the night, as they were leaving, Mark pulled me aside. "Okay," he said, his expression serious. "I get it. She's awesome. And Leo, I've never seen you this happy. Not ever." Sarah remained a distant, complicated presence. She sent Clara terse, infrequent texts. She refused to visit when I was there. It was a wound that would take time to heal, and we gave it that time. Clara was firm in her love for her daughter, but equally firm in her right to her own life and her own happiness. She didn't apologize for us. One evening, months in, I was at her house, working late on some invoices at her kitchen island while she read in a nearby armchair. The quiet between us was comfortable, a shared space built of trust. I looked up from my laptop and watched her, the way the light from the reading lamp caught the silver in her hair, the focused, intelligent line of her brow. An overwhelming wave of love washed over me, so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. "I'm selling my house," I said, the words coming out of nowhere. She looked up from her book, her expression calm, unsurprised. "Oh, yeah," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "It's too quiet there now, and all my favorite coffee mugs are here." She closed her book, setting it carefully aside. She stood up and walked over to me, leaning against the island. "Is that so?" "It is," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I was thinking, this is a big house, and that garden is going to produce a lot of tomatoes. You might need help. A permanent live-in handyman. Works for cookies, you know." Her eyes searched mine, and I saw everything I needed to see there: love, hope, a little bit of fear, and a resounding yes. "My toolbox is still empty," she whispered. "We can share mine," I whispered back. And so we did, 2 years later. The morning sun streamed into a kitchen that was neither mine nor hers, but ours. We'd sold both our houses a year ago, a shedding of old skins. We found a place an hour outside the city, a rambling old farmhouse with a few acres of land, a wraparound porch, and a big, dilapidated barn. The house was a project, a perfect, glorious, maddening project. It was our masterpiece. I had spent the last year bringing it back to life, with Clara as my architect, my designer, and my partner in all things. The barn was now my workshop, a dream space with high ceilings and room for all my tools, and then some. The fields were now home to Clara's sprawling, chaotic, and ridiculously productive vegetable garden. Our lives, once so separate and settled, were now deeply, wonderfully entangled. I was standing at the huge soapstone sink I'd installed, washing dirt from a handful of freshly picked carrots. Clara came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her chin on my shoulder. "Morning," she murmured, her voice warm against my ear. "Morning," I said, turning my head to kiss her. The gesture was as natural as breathing. "Walter's been digging in the carrot patch again. He's quality control," she said, her lips curving into a smile against my neck. She pointed to the coffee maker. "Is that a new mug?" Sitting next to the coffee maker was a mug I didn't recognize. It was simple white, and on the side, in a clean black font, it said, "The Handyman." I chuckled, drying my hands. Where did that come from? Special delivery, she said, her eyes twinkling. She gestured to the front porch. A small package sat by the door. It came yesterday. From Sarah. I paused. Sarah had, over the last year, slowly, cautiously come around. She'd met a kind, stable geology professor and moved to Colorado. The frantic energy had calmed. She had visited us here twice. The first visit was stiff and awkward. The second, just a few months ago, was better. There was laughter. There was a fragile, tentative peace. A mug? I asked. It's her version of an olive branch, I think, Clara said softly. Or maybe just her sense of humor finally catching up. I picked it up. It felt solid in my hands. I looked at Clara, at the love and contentment in her eyes, at the life we had built from the ground up, a life of shared purpose and dirty hands and endless conversation. Suddenly, the faucet I was just using gave a violent shudder and then began to spray a fine, powerful mist of water sideways, directly onto my shirt. What the? I yelped, jumping back as the spray intensified. Clara burst out laughing, a deep, full-throated laugh of pure delight. Well, look at that, she said, trying and failing to stifle her giggles. Something is actually genuinely broken. I stood there, soaked and dripping onto the floor I had so painstakingly laid, and I started laughing too. It was perfect. It was absurd. I think I'm going to need some tools for this one, I said, grinning at her. Let me help, she said, her eyes shining. She walked over to the massive, custom-built pantry I designed for her. She opened a lower cabinet and pulled out a familiar canvas tool pouch, my go-to kit for indoor jobs. She unzipped it, pulled out a pipe wrench, and walked back over to me. She held it out, her expression a perfect mix of love and playful mockery. The sunlight caught the silver streaks in her hair, and in that moment, she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Think you can handle it, handyman? She asked. I took the wrench from her, our fingers brushing in that familiar, electric way. I looked at her, this incredible woman who had seen the man behind the quiet facade, who had called me not because she needed things fixed, but because she knew, somehow, that I was the one who could help her rebuild. And in the process, we had rebuilt each other. Yeah, I said, my voice soft. I think I can handle it. I had spent the first half of my life building sturdy, reliable structures for other people. I built kitchens and cabinets and houses, things that were meant to be safe and to last. But with Clara, in this beautiful, imperfect home, surrounded by her chaotic garden and my noisy tools, I had finally built a place for myself. Not a house, but a home. A place not of safety, but of belonging. A place where I was at long last, truly and completely seen. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have taken that first call from your ex's mom? Or would the history have been too much to overcome? Sometimes the most unexpected connections are waiting just on the other side of an awkward situation. Tell me your story in the comments. Have you ever had a second chance you didn't see coming, or met someone who saw you more clearly than anyone had before? If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.